Hello, I'm Toycat, and the word client state sounds like they're positively medieval, at least these pigeons seem to think so, but the truth is that Europe was divided into two fairly recently and were somewhat forced, depending on which side of the wall you were, to use socialism or democratic capitalism as their main form of being. Of course, every country has its own autonomy, but when you use that autonomy wrong, you might get invaded by your neighbour, just like Hungary did by the Soviet Union for daring to have free and fair elections. And so this is an interesting example to point to when we talk about the modern day Middle East. It is divided into many separate countries, with a couple of them clearly being the big players in the region, Saudi Arabia and Iran. However, looking at the rest of the region, you can see that they basically have to work out what is the best move for us to be able to keep having our own country existing and having as much autonomy as possible. And that's why things get tricky when Trump comes up with a brand new plan for the Middle East, which you might have heard is broadly put as, oh, what if we took the big problem area, the one that's been struggling for a while, and we take all of the people out of that area and say you cannot return. Then there would be no war. You know, if you remove one of the two countries, then you can't have war anymore, is something that is certainly a perspective, I guess you could say. And so this was a perspective that was not only criticized by every US ally in the world, but even countries like North Korea come out of their, an isolationist slump and say, yeah, this is a bit of a bluster, saying something which I think is very interesting as a translation, which is the world is now boiling like a porridge pot over the US. I'm going to be entirely honest. I don't understand what that's meant to mean, but there's porridge going all over the United States right now, is what North Korea says. But yet, despite this fact, despite the fact that it's universally unpopular from everyone from France to North Korea, and yet somehow you end up with one of the major leaders of the region who are most opposed to this, having a showdown with Trump, you might say. This is what headlines will certainly say. And you know what that face-off is going to lead to? You know, again, the biggest country, one of the big countries in the region, right next to it, the one that probably benefits the most from stability, one of the countries which has one of the highest internal domestic political issues being, oh yeah, I feel like having more Arabs in the region versus those people who came from elsewhere or whatever they might say. The people who have the biggest and strongest incentive to say, yeah, I feel like you've got a little bit of a crazy idea there, Trump. You know what has happened over there? Well, interestingly, after meeting with Trump, Jordan King, the King of Jordan, Abdullah II, reiterates his steadfast opposition to moving Palestinians out of Gaza. And so you might say like, oh yeah, he's totally done that. But at the exact same time, the US is seeing this as a victory because after going in with, one of their allies, with basically one of the most crazy plans to them, they had to say, yeah, my commitment is to Jordan, but obviously we want to not have displaced Palestinians, but we will take, even though the US wants us to take some Palestinians, so we'll take some Palestinians. We're not taking all of them, damn it. And basically it's been a bit of a move in the region of Trump basically getting to say like, yeah, we are going into the Middle East and we are reminding people that we are the guys in charge here. We are allowed to come up with crazy ideas, and guess what? You will have to do them if we say it, which sounds like really, really bad diplomacy. But if you think about it, I guess if you think about it too hard, you realize some of the flaws of it. But the domestic political win for him is like, yeah, Trump says that it's a death trap in Gaza right now. It's a place that no one would want to stay because people are living in hell. And if you're curious as to why Jordan, we contribute a lot of money to Jordan and Egypt, by the way, a lot to both, but I don't have to threaten that, he says, after directly threatening it, because the US sends Jordan about $1 billion a year, and American foreign aid is currently paused. And so a lot of people in Jordan are a little bit concerned about said big military aid. A lot of people who are in this region that have managed to build themselves this like peaceful society where they managed to stay mostly out of the Middle Eastern issues are like, oh, that presents a problem, right? There is this very big moral issue that literally every country in the region, and again, the people of the region, would more or less universally say is a bad idea. Because regardless of what you think about the situation between Palestine and Israel, again, the fact that the truth of the matter is that everyone has, seemingly, if you're on the internet, everyone has a very strong opinion about like, okay, these people just need to stop doing what they're doing because the other people are right, and when they attack them, but when they attack back, that's wrong, right? Like, basically, the never-ending cycle of aggression in exchange for aggression, that is the problem that people are trying to solve, and you would solve that by saying, okay, how about you go back to a situation where blank, 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 insert things that's good for your side and your worldview. It's a very, very tricky issue for the world and for major world players, but for the Middle East, it's a really simple issue. They believe, the idea, a lot of countries here are called Arab places, literally in the names. There's the United Arab Emirates, but there's also Saudi Arabia, Arabia, but the broad thing is most of the region views themselves as Arab people, which have different borders and have different countries, but are broadly the same, and that is why the plight is always going to be amongst the Arab side of the conflict, especially if you dive into the deeper issue between certain religions here, we can make a point about it, but that's not the point we want to go into in this video, because it'll be 20 minutes and nothing will be achieved besides yelling. But instead, the point is so why is it then that Jordan is willing to go through all of this and make its comments about yeah, we disagree with this? Even Al Jazeera, which I've mentioned before, I think is a very neutral news source outside of the Middle East. The further from the Middle East you go, the better and the higher quality Al Jazeera gets. When it comes to Qatar's interests, I would say it becomes a bit of a problem. You could argue there's something similar with the BBC and certain domestic British politics issues. But yeah, there's something very interesting that's happening here because Trump has doubled down on his Gaza takeover plan. And although Abdullah disagrees with and says Arab states have their own plans, he has to remain incredibly diplomatic. Why is this the case? Broadly speaking, it is down to this same exact issue that I described in the introduction of this video, and that is that every country in the world kind of has a role to play, right? Ultimately, we can say as many times as we like that every sovereign nation is equal, but just like I mentioned in the previous video, we can say all we like that, yeah, the Cook Islands have just as much power in the world and just as much say over what happens to it as, say, Pakistan does, but the truth is Pakistan actually has substantially more of a say over the running of the world or the way in which things go, because there is still, without any world government of any form, still a little bit of might makes right, which is why the truth is that being the United States, by just being the largest military, even by being on the other side of the world, the United States is one of the major players in this region, something I feel like a lot of Americans still have to scratch their heads and question quite regularly. And so the interesting thing about the different positions between, say, a Jordan or between an Iraq these days, and the difference in position between one of these countries is basically that they have to realize that at some point your country's existence is going to rely on a stable security regime in the area, and so a decent amount of the Middle East outside of Iran and its allies have to basically decide, yeah, the US, they come in here and they do some very weird things, but in exchange they guarantee security. This is what you might call the modern day vassal state, whereas and this defines why Jordan will have to say the things that Jordan will say. Meanwhile, India is out here as an example of the exact opposite. India is an example of a country that goes the exact opposite way and says, yeah, well, actually, we're going to have a big discussion about how we can run our trade better, but they fundamentally will always be approaching issues in a different way. As opposed to, getting $1 billion for Jordan might be a big deal. It's ultimately, they're going to be fine without it, right? But $1 billion is a huge amount. The amount of money it would take to sway India is going to be very different. And ultimately, India's goal in the world is not to one day be subordinate to the United States or China in the two, within the two great powers we have right now. Ultimately, the goal of a country like India is to grow into its own superpower. And so, sure, it's important to keep things like trade going, and so it looks as though that might happen. But the truth is that one of the reasons India is clashing with the US is because they have huge tariffs on basically everything coming into the country. Unlike a lot of the Western world, which ultimately are wealthier countries, but a lot of Western countries have gotten to the point where tariffs are a very rare situation by situation issue, but India is still covered in them because they're specifically trying to build and maintain, at some international cost, all sorts of industries within the country because they want to be self-reliant, which is why Trump isn't going to India to suggest some crazy plans in the region there. He assumes that, you would assume as a world, that India has got that covered, and so I think that's a really interesting view to have, especially as we move towards a new reality, because some countries like, again, another example would be Singapore. Singapore is a country that has succeeded massively by basically saying, yeah, as a country of like a few million people living on an island that is the size of a small city, you have no chance of making it big by being like, let's make our own giant moves. But by being the country that enables other countries, it's massive. In fact, you might recall that North Korea actually met North Korea and Trump actually met in Singapore because it was chosen as such a neutral venue for both countries. To be able to be friends with both North Korea and indeed China, but to be able to be friends of the Asian sphere of influence while also being a great place for the US is an incredible situation to be in. Some countries get really tightly locked into having one world power. If you were to take, say, the Dominican Republic as an example of this, right? The Dominican is in a situation where ultimately so much of their trade and their economy is going to rely on the United States that they have full free choice to do whatever they want. But if they ever did something that really, really upset the US, that might backfire on them. Whereas if you build a situation where you're playing off multiple powers against each other, a la Singapore, you get to the situation where you don't have to do everything the US says, you don't have to do everything that Europe says, you don't have to do everything that China says, as long as you try to get to a situation where they all like you. This is the ideal world for countries like that, but it's not where countries like India are going, where they're specifically aiming to be a superpower. I've got this very unbiased source here, called the Indian Express, that posits that India will be a superpower soon, which obviously, again, just keep the bias as a point of like, yeah, this is the belief within India that as the global balance of power transitions from the unipolar system to a multipolar framework, at that point is where India is going to be one of those powers. If India can keep industrializing at the speed they are, because right now being middle-lower income is not the, or lower-middle income is not the ideal situation to be in. But if India can keep moving forwards, they can be in a great situation. But this is something that really only about a dozen of the countries on Earth can say. Iran feels like it can be one of them. We'll see if they're right about that. But for most countries, your move is basically you have to placate the big powers of the day. This is the situation that I think every country finds themselves questioning at some point. Norway may be an example. They are outside the EU, but they have to do every single thing that happens in the Norwegian market basically has to mirror what happens in the EU market. Obviously, they are kind of beneficial in that they also have great relations outside of the EU, but the UK maybe is a great example too. We have great relations with lots of countries around the world, but also we are beholden to, if the EU says something, we probably have to move in that general direction too, right? And so this is the kind of curse of being a small or medium-sized country. As a world power, you dictate the way the winds blow. But as a smaller power, when your neighbor says, yeah, what we're going to do is we're going to take, this neighboring territory, which is really important to a lot of you, and we're going to have to develop it into real estate. And what they have to say in response is like, ooh, we think that is bad, and so we would like it if you stopped. But there is nothing more that ultimately can be done. And yes, also, I think an interesting takeaway here is that Trump is viewing this as a real estate issue, not as an issue of where people live in relation to their land. But again, regardless of the specifics of the issue, it all ultimately comes down to how much, in the current world, how much power do you have and how much do you get to influence? And for some countries, that is worth taking the chance on. But for other countries, it's worth going, whatever you say, I guess, and rolling their eyes and then getting back to whatever they want to do. And isn't that an interesting situation? Speaking of interesting situations, I know someone's going to question the red shirt at some point. I've always heard this idea of like blue-collared people versus white-collared people. And I feel like, for people who work, if you're like in the modern age where we have this like self-employed contractor thing, like myself with YouTuber, I think that red shirt is the perfect explanation for that. And speaking of perfect explanation, first of all, I want to show you something. It's right over here. Here we go. I made a post on YouTube showing you the new name for the Gulf of America / Mexico. And what's really fun about this is, no, forgot what it was, but tell me what you think this place should be called. Maybe we can come up with a fun name for it. But I also want to show you something else that's fun. So if you click on a recent video of mine, such as the one where I went 4,000 miles across the earth to go to McDonald's, it's very humid in the Caribbean, by the way. But you want to see something fun? If you hit the like button now, it has a little animation that's new. That looked like the old animation to me. My editor told me there was a new like button animation. I figured I would look at it in a video. I think I regret that. I'll try liking a different video. One of the things that I think makes me a bad YouTuber is most YouTubers like go and like their video when it first comes out. I don't know. Do you like the new like animation? Is there a dislike animation? There's not. So you get an animation for liking, but not for disliking. I know what I would do. Anyway, yeah. If you've been enjoying these videos, wait. If you've been enjoying these videos, I'll mute the video, and then look at this. It's like it's me talking about what's happening in the Gulf of America. Anyway, yeah, if you like these videos, you can consider supporting the channel on Patreon. It's been going pretty well. Do you want to see actually? It's amazing to me that a bunch of people just started finding the videos in the last few days. Yeah, the basic goal is just being like, let's try something out, and it's been going well. Look, I made $1,000 this month. You know how many kebabs I can buy with $1,000? I don't even know how many kebabs I can buy with $1,000. I bet it's a healthy number though. Anyway, yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video, because I'll see you. Actually, no, I won't see you ever again. I'm not making any commitments. Second channel, don't care. Bye.